I was still strapped into my airplane seat, exhausted from the long international flight, when my phone buzzed in my pocket. A simple notification turned my stomach cold. Karen sold your land while you were gone. At first I thought it was some kind of cruel prank, but the email that followed proved it wasn't. The documents were real. My land, the property my family had cared for and lived on for decades, had been sold while I was thousands of miles away in the air. This wasn't just land to me. It was memories. My father had poured every ounce of his effort into building that home and planting those trees that gave shade in the summer. Every corner of that property carried the weight of our family's history. And now Karen, the neighbor who had always been obsessed with control and appearances, had managed to steal it from me using lies, forged papers and connections I had never imagined. Karen had a reputation. She smiled sweetly at the community board meetings, appearing like the perfect neighbor. But behind closed doors, she thrived on manipulation. She had always wanted to expand her influence in the neighborhood, controlling every lawn, driveway, and mailbox. People whispered about her, but most were too afraid to confront her. And now she had struck at me in the worst possible way. By the time I was mid-flight over the Atlantic, she had completed the sale. She convinced the community board that my property was abandoned. Her fraudulent signatures and fake documents meant that legally the land wasn't mine anymore. She had thought I'd never find out. She had thought I'd accept it. She couldn't have been more wrong. When I landed and stepped out of the airport, my legs felt weak. I barely had the strength to grab my luggage before I rushed to the county office to see the paperwork in person. My blood ran cold as I held the documents in my hands. My land, my family's history gone. And the person behind it? Karen standing smugly on her front porch as if she had achieved some great victory. But even in that despair, I knew I had to act. I couldn't let her get away with this. I had to think strategically. How could I turn the tables on someone so cunning, so manipulative? The idea started to form while I examined the legal files, scanning every forged signature and fake approval. Here's a question for you. If someone sold your property while you were away, what would you do? Would you fight in court, or would you take matters into your own hands? Drop your answer in the comments because I want to know how far you would go. And while you think about it, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe, because what happens next is something you would never expect. I didn't just contact lawyers. I didn't just file complaints. I made a call that would change everything. Police involvement. Karen never expected the authorities to come knocking. She never expected her careful plans to unravel in front of the neighbors who had long feared her. And when the first officer arrived, Karen's confident facade started to crack. When the police first arrived at the neighborhood, Karen thought she had nothing to worry about. She stepped onto her porch with that smug, self-satisfied smile she always wore, clutching a cup of coffee as if the world was still under her control. She waved casually at the officers, expecting them to take her side or at least treat her politely. But the moment she realized they were there to investigate her, her confidence began to crack. The lead officer carried a thick folder filled with the documents I had handed over. Forged signatures, fake transfer papers, fraudulent community board approvals, all pointed directly to Karen. At first she laughed nervously, trying to dismiss it. "This is ridiculous," she scoffed, flicking her hand as if the evidence meant nothing. But when the officer pulled out the official land transfer documents, all with her handwriting and her false signatures, her smile vanished. Neighbors began peeking out of windows, some stepping onto their porches, whispering to one another. Everyone had stories about Karen, how she had fined them unfairly, bullied them, and controlled their lives through intimidation. Some had even paid her just to avoid her constant harassment. Now standing outside, they watched as the police circled her property with caution tape, not to protect her but to seize it. Karen's face drained of color. She shouted, "You can't do this! This is my neighborhood." The officer looked her dead in the eye and said calmly, "Ma'am, this is fraud. You don't own this land and you don't control this community." For the first time, Karen had no words. She was trapped, exposed, powerless. And then the police began moving beyond just my property. Their investigation revealed a long history of Karen's manipulation, illegal transfers, hidden fees, and stolen property across the neighborhood. Within hours, Officers had begun seizing every lot she had tampered with. Her kingdom was crumbling, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Neighbors watched in awe as the very woman who had tormented them for years was finally being held accountable. Some cheered quietly. Some shouted, "Finally!" But most simply stared, realizing that Karen's reign of control was over. Handcuffs replaced her arrogant smile, and the officers read her rights aloud as she pleaded and tried to shift the blame. It was too late. The evidence was undeniable. Standing there, I felt a rush of relief and vindication, not just for me, but for every neighbor she had wronged. My land was back in my name, safe and secure, and the neighborhood itself was finally free from her grip. Justice was served in a way that no court alone could have guaranteed. Here's a question for you. If you had a neighbor like Karen, someone who had manipulated and stolen from everyone around her, would you stop at reclaiming your own property, or would you fight until their entire empire was destroyed? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your thoughts. And while you decide, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe, because the story doesn't end here. What happened after Karen's arrest shocked the entire community even more. By the end of the day, Karen's influence was gone. The neighborhood entered temporary police receivership until ownership disputes were resolved. Every fraudulent record she had tried to maintain was erased, and she was left with nothing. For the first time in years, the community could breathe. The houses, the yards, the streets were finally free, and everyone knew that trying to play God with people's lives would have serious consequences. Watching her powerless and defeated, I realized something. Sometimes justice doesn't wait for the courts. It arrives when people refuse to let corruption win. Karen had thought she was untouchable, but her arrogance led to her total downfall.